Do it.
Ik ja yuxatini at itat the cut you on. You Tlein you do a sock ya Tlein. Iti a kukaha dis. Ya tleka ka gushuk yaki ya wahi ya dis. Ye awe gosh. Ya the achtu asagu yi inka konik awe adad. We yachkoha yagi sandik dis gao. Shtakatat aya. Adeya nechia ya tani teen. Gulchi shaki ti achtu yaki ujin chasati yag eltakat yohan. Ya gwall dech yagi aka yela chat dasa aya yigach du aka gwall nukt aya haskakoshi ya haanikak. Ye awe wan qanins qawsagu teen. Ye awe achtuasagu yisaku yayagi. Gunil chi shuhan yak a. It's great to see everyone. It is October. We call it Tlein. It's a big moon. Before that is Yeti, and then after that is Dis, the digging it up month. So there's names for months. Tlingit used to go by a lunar calendar, so there were 13 months. It's been adapted to 12. The names for the months do change a little bit depending on where you're at, so there's a bit of a dialect difference between the names of the months. Let's see, 29 days have passed this month. Then it got me thinking, oh, we should do a little bit on time because it's kind of fun to be able to do that. But then I was trying to remember which one I got a couple different sort of slideshows I use for time. I guess we'll do this one, maybe. Yeah. Anyways, anybody got anything you've been thinking about as far as Tlingit language goes? Okay. Let me see. My calendar isn't ready. I got another one. Hold on. Okay, I'll just show you folks. This won't be accurate to the month. That's okay. So we got to change. So this was September. So September is everybody say Yeti.
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 So that's a child moon. So the way that this Yeti works is it is a kinship term, but it's also in a possessed form. So on its own, it's Yet. It's maybe the only kinship term that's actually just a noun. So most of them are not nouns. They are specific kinship terms, which means when something in Tlingit becomes owned or shows a relationship to something, it gains a suffix. So like in English, you'd say Lance cup, Lance's cup. If we spoke English with Tlingit grammar, we would say Lance cup, Lance cups. So the marker would go onto the owned object or the thing that's showing the relationship. So that's why a whole bunch of place names have Hini in it because it's something river, something river. Chak, eagle, Heen, river, Chakini, eagle river. So with Yet, it shows that possession by switching to Yadi. And so when you say Ach Yadi, it's my child, Ha Yadi, our child. And that's also why it pluralizes, like Yetki. So sometimes you'll hear An Yetkusani or Ach Yetki, Ha Yetki, Adetki, those types of things. As it's showing you can have a plural marker on a noun and you can have a possessed or relational marker on a noun. But then the Yeti doesn't always mean it's something's child. So sometimes it means a child, one of those things, which could just mean it's a small one. So if you had a little teeny boat, it could be Yeti. That's a cute name for a little boat. It's like a little baby boat. And so that's what you've got here. Like this is not the child of the moon, although if there was a child of the moon, you could say dis Yeti. And thinking of the moon, it has a name too. It's an old name. It's called Lichéesh, which means tide controller. And the moon used to be on the earth and was Raven's uncle. And then Raven defeated his uncle, and then it went up above and became the moon. But it still controls the tide. But it did flood the world and was a really kind of a mean person, like super mean person. So, but we're not going to shake our fists at the moon. It's too powerful. So a couple of sort of time concepts, so we can adjust this and say, so dis Yeti is September, like baby moon, little moon. So then dis Tlein is October. So we say dis Tlein.
Tlein.
Dis Tlein.
This Tlein.
Dis Tlein.
This
Tlein.
So this word dis can be the moon, a month, or a woman's moon time, as they might call it. It could be it could refer to any of those three things. And so dis Tlein so this is a noun. Dis is a noun. Can somebody tell me what an adjective is? What's an adjective?
A descriptive word?
Yeah, it's a descriptive word. It modifies a noun. So you can have a dog, and you can have a big dog, and you can have a big red dog. Or is it a red? No, it's a big red dog. So in English, adjectives technically have an order. Like, you can read about this stuff if you want to, but it has to be sort of like big red dog and not red big dog. Like, it just has this preference, which is kind of wild. There's like 12 different sort of orders or something like that. With Tlingit, you really only ever get one adjective per noun, unless you're just trying to be silly. We're doing that with my kids I sing a song with them when I brush their teeth, which is Ye away something de usk. This is the way that people brush something's teeth. Then we rotate. They get to pick what kind of animal it is. And it's all been farting animals lately, but then they want like farting unicorn. They really want to do all kinds of silly stuff. And it's our fault because we said you can only use potty talk in the bathroom. So then when they go in the bathroom, they say Tóoch, goose, Tóoch, Tóoch. They would just say them all. And so we're like, well, we said that was for the bathroom, so there you go. Anyways, so coming back to this. So Tlingit, there's two types of adjectives though. So you got to just sort of remember which type it is. There's one that goes in front of the noun. So you can have, if you had, for example, this is not the name of a month, so we'll take the capitals off of here. Yeast dis. Everybody say yeast dis.
Yeast.
Yes.
Yeast dis.
Yeast.
Does anybody know what that might mean? There's moon in there.
New moon.
Yeah, new moon, right? So yeast is new or young. So like it changes that noun, right? So this is how you could change a noun. It could be new, it could be young, it could be old, it could be male, female. There's a whole list of them. So in this case, yeast dis, this would also be a new moon, like like the moon phases. This works for the moon phases as well, as does this one. So this is an adjective that comes before, and you can have yeast ha, yeast shawat, a young man or a young woman. And then it can, on this side, this would be the full moon, dis Tlein, which is a big moon. So Tlein is big. So just like you could have Yak Yeti, you could have Yak Tlein. So that's usually what we call like the ferry or some big boat, right? Would be Yak Tlein. So Tlein could come after nouns and just make them big. But in this case, when we talk about the month names, it is talking about a big moon, because October, you kind of get a big moon, you get big tides. It's just a seasonal thing. Let's see. Oh yeah, okay. Let me. Ooh, the tide controller. Hold on. So where am I going to put this? Let me double check that spelling too. And this name comes from the first Raven story. So like a lot of times when you tell Raven stories, they're in a sequence. And then it starts with how Raven was born. And Raven was born, he defeated his uncle. Let me see if this changes when I paste it. Ah, I spelled it right. Okay. And so this, you do have compounds in Tlingit. So one of the things, the longer you work with Tlingit, the more you'll sort of realize, like, you could write this as that, and then you have these different parts, right? For now, we can sort of start to realize how to pull this thing apart. So the U has to do with this back and forth type thing. But it's really, there's a couple things, like with Tlingit verbs, sometimes there's like a couple things you put in there, which just changes the way the verb functions. And a common one is to put U on the front and the letter K at the end. And what those do is it means it happens on a regular basis. For example, what is, anybody know what this is? Yuchatunk. Does it look familiar at all?
Speak.
Yeah, it's language or a word or a speech. And this is why you'll hear a possessed form. So coming back to this sort of idea of possession, you have, so you could put tlingit in front of it. And then now it's going to change to you katangi. In one of my advanced Tlingit classes some time ago, we took a pause. Sometimes like right around the middle of the semester, we all get like pretty exhausted, just really grinding out Tlingit for a couple months. So we just sort of, we didn't record the class and we just said, let's do a true confessions. What are some things that are kind of funny about your study of the Tlingit language? And someone said, I never knew what Yukatangi was until like year 3. And you would always say it, but then I figured I would just figure it out, but then I didn't figure it out. And so much time went by that I got too nervous to ask about what it was. And then I finally, it means this would be Tlingit language. So Yukatung. So there's some rules that you can learn and we can look at some point. So the possessive, you basically kind of put an I at the end. Sometimes it'll be a U. Sometimes it'll be a YI. And there's a whole set of rules for that. But for now, you just say, throw an I on the end. And that's how you make it owned. It's a possessed thing. But there's a set of letters that will change. So if you put an I on a K, it'll change to a G. So that's why you get yukatangi. So sometimes you'll hear people talk and they'll say ha yukatangi. How did I change it? Went from tlingit yukatangi to ha yukatangi. What changed? What is it now?
Our language.
Our language, right? And then I could change it to mine, ach yukatangi, right? And that could just be, that could also mean my speech. That doesn't mean I've claimed the language, now it's mine, right? Just because it could also refer to my speech or like some word I just said. So when we look at yukatung, we also have the same thing. Because if you said someone is talking right now, you'd say yukayatung, they are talking. And so what you end up with is this U plus the K at the end. These things mean it happens on a regular basis. And there's a bunch of different ways to do this in Tlingit, to talk about repetition or like a sequence of things, an order of things. So when we go back to this name, because for some, they see this name and it just makes me think of my days studying with Nora Dowenhauer and Richard Dowenhauer, or Richard Dowenhauer. So you see, like, there's this underlined K, there's this ejective S, there's a regular K, underlined K, regular K. That's part of the tricky part of this name is you go, like that's just built into this name. And so to say it, well, we'll say it in a second. But Richard, he said, man, that's a hard name. And Nora's like, it's Lichéesh. What's hard about it? It's not hard. It's just kind of funny. They'd go at it a little bit in front of us. It was always fun being in class with them. Every now and then it would feel like mom and dad were arguing. We're all just watching it. So the U part with the K at the end has to do with a repetitive version of a verb. Then we'll just sort of tease out this verb a little bit. So we got a noun. You could throw nouns right on the front of a verb. Tlingit allows you to do that. So there's a couple of fun things. Body parts can have body parts. So you have a tlek, and that tlek has a sha, and so the finger has a head. So achsha, my head. Ach-tleksha, my finger head. Ach-chiksha, my upper arm head. And sometimes that's how you'll say fingertip and shoulder. It just does stuff like that. And similar to that is you could put a noun onto a verb. So if I were to write this thing out, it's keys. Does anybody know what that is? Keys.
That's the tide, right?
It's the tide, right? So you could just put the tide right onto a verb. I just put the tide on a verb. Magic. So then you have some other parts in here that are a little tricky. We won't get into all of them. But if you totally just unpack this thing, this is what you've got. Okay, that's what you've got. I might write that low. So we've got you, and oops, I didn't underline that. So the repetitive, that's what the U and the K does. So this kind of repetitive thing. Tide. This is at its core the meaning of this verb root. So every verb contains a root which has meaning. And sometimes you can put other stuff on there and just really alter that pretty dramatically. So in this case, you have you, tide, and then jumping to the verb root, this means to say something or declare something, right? Like you could say, and especially if you're doing like very specific things, not like they told this information, but they said this thing. You know, it's like when a kid comes, this mom said, you got to stop that right now. That's what she said, right? And same with like direct quotations. You're going to use this verb root. But then with these two, when these combine, this ka and this plus this ka, it means to order someone, to command someone. You're commanding someone to do something. And that's what you're getting here. This is the classifier. It is every verb at its core must have a classifier and a root. The root contains meaning. The classifier starts to tell us what the verb does. For example, one of its main functions is to say, didn't happen, happened. Didn't happen, happened. And that's what it does. So when you kind of pull this apart, sometimes it helps you because then you see keys and then ka and then ka and then this K. But Tlingit does quite a few tricky things. And one of them is some verb roots, especially if they end with AA or OO. So AA or OO. If you put something on the end of them, they will change. So this one will switch to that, and this one will switch to that. So it's a little tricky, and we bring it up because so that you know, if you see, you say, this sure looks like a verb, but I don't see anything that says cake. Then you say, maybe this is a suffix at the end, and I could look up ka, and you'll find it. So this name altogether, we'll try it, is Yukitzkukek. Yukitzkukek.
Kiss cake.
Cake.
Yukitzkukek.
Kiss cake.
Okay. Now where did I put this other thing? It's got like. Okay, we'll do that other one another time. So coming back, there's a couple things about time. These days are off. Don't worry about that. So one is a single day. We're going to kind of just jump to this. We're going to ignore this ya part for a second. There's kind of multiple ways to say day, like D-A-Y, right? Like today, yesterday. So a single day is yagi. Everybody say it. Yagi.
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 And so that could also be whoops. You ever type something and your fingers are off, and then you look up and you're like, what is that? It's like the whole thing's messed up. So this could also be yucky, or it could be yagi. So there are at least 3 ways to say that word. So yagi is a day. But if you want to say today, you'll say yayagi.
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 And we do some work. Sometimes we'll say, well, what about like Mother's Day? So we'll say ka yagi. So you possess this one. The first part is like People's Mother's Day. Ka ish yagi. And then, as we name sort of holidays, sometimes they get pretty straightforward names. Sometimes we come up with fun. Kek yagi is Pig Out Day. And so that was one of our elders named Thanksgiving. But yayagi is today. So if we go back to yesterday, it's tatke. Tatke.
Tatke.
Takke.
Tatke.
Tatke.
Takke.
Tomorrow, seqanan.
Tatke. Sekanen.
Seqanan.
Sekanen.
Kanen.
Seqanan.
Sekanen.
And some people say seqan.
Sekan.
Sekan.
So they do the same thing, but it's common for people to mix up these two. So tatke, yayaki, seqanan. Tatke, yayaki, seqanan. So as you to think about time, and time is important. When we go into Huna, seqanan ay atikachtikhoch. We're going tomorrow. And so as we sort of talk about time, so there's the month, there's days, as in today, tomorrow, yesterday. And then we'll do the names of the days of the week. And this also changes sometimes from place to place. So the way that we're teaching at the university is, so you've got Sunday, which comes from Sunday. Then you have day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, and Adolescent Sunday. So we'll say them. I'm going to change these to yagi. Sorry. Okay. So everybody say Sunday.
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 Cake yagi.
Cake.
Yaki.
Cake yagi.
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 Tóoch yagi.
Yeti.
Tóoch yagi.
Yagi.
Nusk yagi.
Nas.
Yagi.
Nusk yagi.
Nas.
Yagi.
Dachoon yagi.
Dachun.
Yagi.
Dachoon yagi.
Yagi.
Cajun yagi.
Cajun.
Yagi.
Cajun yagi.
Cajun Yagi.
Yagi.
Sunday katsku.
Sunday.
Sunday.
Sunday. Katsuku.
Okay. So we talked earlier how Yeti is a child or a little thing. Katsku is an adolescent. So if I was thinking of things in the natural world, like if I said, oh, we'll just do these things. Let's see. Whoops. So if I were to take something like, I'll talk about these guys because they came in one time and stomped on my barbecue grill.
Yeah.
So we'll just say these and I'll ask you what you think they are. Everybody say speak.
Eek.
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 Speak Yeti.
Eek. Yadi.
Speak Yeti.
Eek. Yadi.
Speak Katsku.
Eek.
Katsuku.
Speak Katsku.
Katsuku.
What are these three things? What do you think?
Bear,
Brown
baby
bear.
bear,
Baby bear.
Black bear.
Black bear?
Baby black bear.
Baby black bear?
And then adolescent black bear. Would that
Adolescent?
be like a yearling or whatever?
Yeah, so like if this could just be any black bear, but if you saw a black bear that's still with mama, that would be Tseek Yeti. But one that's kind of on its own, like mom's probably still around, right? Like when they start to, it's big enough to kind of go out on its own, but then mom will still be around. And that's kind of how these terms work. So it's like, so this is just the thing in general. Then you can have a Yeti, then you can have a Kutsku, then you can have the full-on thing. And this works for children as well. So for people, they just get a couple of different categories. Let's see, maybe I'll move that one up there. And then we'll start over here. So we'll just say, and then you'll have, well, let's see, we'll move them through these phases. So when a baby is born, it's Tokaneyi.
11 o'clock.
Tokani.
Tokaneyi.
Tukanei.
Tokaneyi.
Tukanei.
Shad.
A couple different ways to say this one. We go with this. But then this is where they start to let me check this one. So with people, they go through these phases, and once you hold on, I'm trying to look something up, talk at the same time. I can't do it. Shotgunsku. Just want to make sure I'm giving you folks the right spellings here. Okay. So with people, though, Even there's a bunch of stuff in Tlingit that doesn't have necessarily gender attached to it. Like some of the pronouns they're just not gendered, right? It's a non-gendered pronoun. But through like tracking periods of growth, you go from tokanegi, and that's, for me, I think of it as can't walk yet. And it has to do with tóoch, which is the cradle board. But then the next phase, now you go female, male. But they both end with gutsku. So this is, once they start walking around, they move into this gutsku phase. So for the females, you'd say shot gutsku.
Shot.
Shot gutsku.
Shot.
That's good.
For the males, you'll say yetakotsku.
Yada
Yada.
kotsu.
Yetakotsku.
Yada kotsu.
So then they go into this phase.
Shot.
So for me, this is from the time they could start walking, and then well, I guess I was talking to Larry Kimura, one of our teachers. He called this in Hawaiian that they came up with a term which was the beginning of the wiry hair or the end of the peach fuzz. So that's when that they're starting to think about dating, and pregnancies could probably happen at this phase. We wouldn't want them to, but it's really not puberty. So once they have passed puberty, now you have shot, shot,
Shot.
and yaduk,
Yaduk.
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 We gotta move these things up. So we saved the baby bear. We didn't get rid of it. It's just on another slide. So then they move into these phases.
These.
I think if we go back to old time Tlingit, like this was time to get married when you hit this phase, right? So this, as far as age-wise, this is probably late teens. So then you have the yeast part, again, is new or fresh. So you have yeast shawat.
Use shawat.
Yeast shawat.
Yeast
What?
Yeast ka.
Yeast.
Yeast ka.
Yeast.
Shot.
And as far as, so if we move this to one side and we move this to the other side, and we'll leave some room right in the middle. So a great question in the chat is, what about non-binary markers? So to just say a child, you'd say atkatsku. 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 And then there's an interesting thing, like, so a lot of the pronouns are non-gendered, but there is a male privileging thing that does happen with ka, because ka, there's two of them and they're exactly the same. So one could be people and one could be a male. Kind of depends on how it's being used. But it doesn't, like if you said ka, that's saying all people. That's not saying all men. But there could be cases where you would be saying all men. So it gets a little bit tricky, sort of like English and mankind and firemen and policemen and fishermen, all these different things. So there is some male privileging that happens with that. But you could have atkatsku, and then you could probably go to tlingit, which would be human, and then just straight to pronouns from here. So huh is they, a singular they, and that would work as well. So once you get to full grown, you have shawat and ka. What you do next is kind of, so you could put Sean after it, which is old. But similar to English, you want to be careful how you're using that, because if it's your dad, sometimes you could say, "Hey, old man," and it's kind of teasing and stuff, or you could say, "Oh, help that old man over there, help that old lady over there," right? But sometimes if you were just to say, "Hey, old lady," like that might not always go over too well. Depends how people feel about aging, and so you can say Shawat Shan and you can say Kashan. Then there's a term when we get into elders, and that's usually this term, Yanwat. So Yanwat is what we usually say for elders, and it comes from a verb, and it means they have finished growing. I've also heard, let's see. Oh, sorry, I thought so. There's actually an extra. There's another term that is used, which is, atwaskuwu. Sorry, this is getting a little messy. So atwaskuwu means a person, they know about things. They know about things. So atwaskuwu is another word that could be used for elders. So these are kind of phases of life things which are related to time. Okay. And sheesh. Any questions? So the last thing about, we'll do some stuff next week too about like what day is it, what month is it, and those types of things. But I want to talk about this little marker up here. This is a suffix to mean at something, and it's usually at rest or residing somewhere. But it also means at that time. So if you said deich yagi, and you want to say on Tuesday, deich yagi, so you put that on there, and that's how you mark time. And it works for seasons as well. Talk in the winter, but you don't need to say in or on, because that's in English. So in winter, on Wednesday, maybe sometime this weekend. But you would use this. This would be the at, which includes nishkakuge. Wasa.
Yes, Shinke Ayach Akwe, young person.
Yeah, yeah.
Gonashish.
Mm-hmm. And then someone else might interpret that though as like they recently became Tlingit, like they started speaking the language or something, but I think that would work. Yisku'u is usually how I hear it though. So I guess that's one that I got to put on there. In here as well, I'll fix my fonts sometimes so it's not, is ku'u, which means people. And yisku'u could mean young people. And so Yiska, that's another one too. Like a Yiska could just be a young person. But then you can make your own decisions, and every language is going through shifts as well, because most languages around the world just realize they've got all kinds of things that they can adjust to sort of become more inclusive of everybody and to not sort of privilege certain groups over others. Let me try and make this stuff smaller. There. A little more room for everything. Okay. Okay. So we'll just do this one, then we'll switch and we'll do our story for a little bit. So here's some phrases, and like in terms of, I talked about this last week and then I didn't do anything about it. Under clinkitlanguage.com, learning Tlingit, there is a little spot called Adultu Ye. And I'm going to start just putting everything in there, and the way I'll do it, so like I'll say the date, the stuff we generally talked about, and then the handout. So you can go and find these slideshows we're looking at, these books that we're looking at, anything that we look at, I'll just start putting there so that if you wanted to review the stuff that we went over, you can go find it. So like thinking about time, we start to sort of push folks to think about this stuff. It's like when you ask this phrase, this on its own, Wasa duwasak, it comes from, right? And so the reason why it's important to sort of look at these things as verbs and not just sort of as whole big phrases, because a lot of people would say, Wasa duwasak means what's your name? And I don't think that's incorrect. I think that is fine. But I think it's more specifically looking at how the grammar functions. You're saying, how do people call it? And it's awkward to sort of translate it that way, right? Because it just sounds, well, it just sounds a little different. But what you have here, and the reason why I think we should look at it is, let me just change this one. So if we have this phrase, Wasa duwasak, there's kind of two main components here. And I'm just going to put a little line right here. So here's our two parts. So we've got Wasa and we've got duwasak. Right, so Wasa is two parts. Wa is how, and then sa is name it. Okay, so that's kind of, and whenever we sort of take the language apart, the reason we do that is to sort of give you some tools to figure out how it's working, because you're going to see it used in different ways, right? So here, the different parts you've got on the verb is this. There's an ending on here, which I would say is probably frozen on there. But at one point, this was a suffix onto sa. This verb root sa is used for a whole bunch of different things that are all connected. So some of the verbs that you can build with this verb root, the way you build verbs is you could change this classifier group, or you can add some nouns to the front, or you can add some things in front of that verb. Sometimes that creates a whole new verb. But from sa, you can have naming something, being called something. You can have resting, breathing. All of those come from the same verb, being out of. You also have nouns that are built out of this. You have sa, or sometimes se, which is the base of the neck. Sometimes it's also voice. You have sa, which is a name. Akhsayi, hasahu. All of these are related. All come from this one sa thing. It's a very important, small little single syllable thing in Tlingit. The other parts that you have here, just to sort of take a closer look at this thing. So on the outside, this first thing, which is, you don't even hear it, but it's there, is them. And sometimes we'll do this thing, we'll say it's a third person object pronoun. That's what we do with this little sort of, it's like extra information. And we put it in there so that folks can start to see this is an object pronoun. That's why this could change to khat duwasak. And that's why it could change to it duwasak, ye duwasak, ha duwasak. There's a list of a type of pronoun, which is an object. That's the one that the verb happens to. So in Tlingit, it goes object, subject, verb every time. That object must come first, right? So you, I call. You, I call, right? It's basically what the word order you're going to have. Anybody want to tell me what the du is? Anybody know? We say it's someone. This is what we call a fourth person human subject. So what does that mean? First person, speaker talking about themselves. Me, I, me, I, me, I. Second person, speaker talking about the person they're talking to. You, you. Third person, speaker talking to someone about someone else. Them, they, them. Fourth person, somebody, some person. So Tlingit has fourth person verbs. So does English, right? Like you come in, some fancy vase, maybe you got some nice vase in your house. Kids are playing. All of a sudden you hear it fall and crash. You come in the room. What happens? It broke. Like that's the fourth person, right? Like the kids, they're unified. Nobody's telling anybody. They're all against you, right? So someone does this. People do it, or sometimes we translate it as it happens. Then we have a classifier, and you'll learn what this thing does, but we will mark this as a zero group plus I. The plus I means it has happened. Then we're going to get to name or call. So that's what you've got here. When you say Wasa dua sak, and when you use this as a phrase, this works really well for what is it called? All right, so you don't have to have the people in there. You just say, what's it called? And this works really well for getting the names of things. Wasa dua sak table. Wasa dua sak chair. Wasa dua sak car. Wasa dua anything you want to know the name of. Someone said last night, wasa dua sak peanut butter. I was like, ooh, it's a good one. I've heard pika butter, which is just Tlingish, but I've also heard kas'ak, which is squirrel food. And I like that name for peanut butter. There's no squirrels out there eating peanut butter, well, unless you feed it to them. But maybe they are. You know what goes on in Squirrel House? I'm just kidding. Yeah, wasad duasak yata shingit. And some spelling standards. This is not really a right or wrong thing. I prefer to write dasa and wasa as separate words. The reason is some people will write dasa, right? But I like to write them as two separate words because something can go right in between them. And I just like people to see that there's a space there, right? And then it's also the construction of the question. Wasa, dasa, kunsa, buksa. No, it's fine. A lot of people write these as one word. It's not something that I would bother correcting, but just as I teach Tlingit, I say just because you could say it could become this. And so this is a question like what is more than? And you can also say what is less than. So sometimes this is still a what question, but you could put things in between the da and the sa. Same with kun. So kun sa is how many or how much. You can say kunuksoy tosugu. How much candy you want? I want all the nooks, all the candy. Okay. So when we go back, that's why we say like, and then you could say yadis. What is this month called? Right? But just in terms of order. What is it called this month? What is it called? Whatever, right? So now you can have all kinds of things. And that's why you can say, Wasa iduasak, how are you called? Wasa khatduasak, how am I called? Okay. And cheesh. The last 9 minutes, maybe we'll do a few of these sentences from this story. So coming back, we've got the girl is 4, the boy is 6. Her name is Sagóot. His name is Shaadá. They have a dog a dog named Tóoch, who only understands Tlingit, and a cat who doesn't listen to anybody. Children are always curious. They went to their grandparents' house. The children did. There's that Yeti, that's children. Only grandma was home. She told them, your grandparent is fishing. We're going to go to camp to be by him. They packed their backpacks. When they got to camp, Shaadá's grandfather wanted to take him fishing. Sagóot and her grandparent were getting the camp ready, or are getting the camp ready. Okay, that gets us back to here. Anybody want to read this sentence?
I'll try.
Sheesh.
Shaadá tu Lichéesh tu I llati chat ade ke dus tech yeah.
Shaadá tu Lichéesh tu I llati chat ade ke dus tech. Yeah. So a couple things is, so we see this to Lichéesh, but we put this CH on there. And that CH can go onto a noun to say, that's the one who's doing the thing. There's a verb coming, and that's the one doing the verb. So you'll see that sometimes. Lichéesh, kusacha, quanch, the cannibal, a raven was the first one. Do I llati. So there's a couple things about this. One is that's how people from Cake would say it. People not from Cake would probably from Tlein, it also say llati. Other folks from other places would say llatu. So this is how the dialect works. There's a lot of things just go to this EE verb. It's usually this EI to EE, right? Woo ne, woo ni. But this is another case. So if you were Pich, you would say llatiu. But so this would be do I llatiu. Taught it to him or her. Taught it to them. But in this case, we know it's the boy. So once we move it to English, sometimes we have decisions to make about how we deal with the problem. Chat is fish. Then there's this other thing with verbs. So sometimes with verbs, we'll say you can put something in front of it, you can put something at the end of it. And then sometimes it's like these little bookends. Put these things on the ends, and now you get this type of thing. So if you have ade in front of it, and yeh at the end. So it's basically ade, verby, yeh. It's the way that verb happens. Right? And so there's just some tricks you're going to learn about Tlingit. But in the middle, you have KTOO. That's people are fishing. They are fishing on a regular basis. The way to fish. So, Shaadá, this boy named Shaadá, his grandparent taught him how to fish. Anybody want to read this one? Sorry, I read it. Tlein ke has What do you folks think of that one? Tlein ke has
Much king salmon.
Yep. And then ke has which is the same verb as this one, right? Ke dus It's just in a different form. What'd they do?
Caught a
They
lot of
caught many king salmon.
Yeah, that's right. So this KTOO is to pull it up, to fish it up. And so Tlein, they caught a lot of king salmon. And it's interesting too, like what verb do we use? Because in English you say caught, right? Which is just sort of different. It's almost like catching it in a trap or something like that, right? Catch a fish. It's not like catching it like you catch a ball. But so sometimes when you switch over from English to Tlingit, you gotta figure out what the appropriate verb would be in Tlingit. Shawat has to tlilk, has to tiu chat ade to tlilkuye. It's kind of long. But what do we think? What do we think? What do we see? I like to do these stories because we just start finding things that we can see, and then we figure out what we don't know, and we sort of pull apart a little bit.
the grandmother taught them.
Yeah, see, shawat has to tlilk there, and shawat female one or woman one. So you could say qa has to tlilk. That would be their grandfather. So tlilk is a non-gendered term. So their grandmother, hastu iu. So now we got hastu e instead of do e. So hastu is them all's. So you could say ach I tltiu taught me. I tltiu taught you. Do I tltiu taught them. Hastu I tltiu taught all of them, taught them all. Then we got fish. And then we got another one of these ade, verby, yeah things. But then we got do elaku. And what do you think? What do you see in the picture? What do you think that verb might be?
Cutting fish.
Cut. So they're not quite cutting it yet, but you got to do one step before you cut it. I mean, they did cut the middle, right?
Gutting.
Gutting. Yes. So this is a verb for removing the guts of a fish. That is the only thing that verb is used for. So we have, it's always interesting to me when we have a specific verb for something. So it's like, yes, this is remove, because if you remove the guts of a deer, it's a different verb. You want to remove the inside of the meat from a clam, that's a different verb. So is usually how you'd say that. Is the verb root. At the end is this thing, which means to remove something. Like, so I think when people learn Tlingit, there's going to be sort of different groups of folks. Some are just sort of like, this is very complicated, just give me the basics so we can start to go along, and don't give me all this other stuff because that's just making me confused. But for some other people, they want to see all those little parts. There's a whole bunch of little parts. And so I try to do a little bit of everything. You know, so, and Richard Dowenhauer used to call it the more than you wanted to know chapters, right? Where there'd be all this extra detail about all this other stuff. Like, oh yeah, and this is a suffix, and you could change this suffix to these other suffixes, and so. But so then you see the d in there, and you see it up here as well. So that's why it's saying like the way that people do this, the way that people do this thing. So you do have a pattern here. The way that people eat it. The way that people write it. Or the way it's eaten, the way it's written, right? And so these are just patterns. These are things that you can sort of think about. And a lot of it depends on where you're at with your language journey as well. Like some of this stuff is maybe a look into the future. Like I'm just trying to figure out like how to say I'm hungry, right? And so next week maybe we'll sort of do something a little different, and we'll look at just sort of useful day-to-day phrases that'll just sort of slow it down a little bit, take a different approach. But we only have a couple pages left of this thing, 3 pages left, so we will also finish this little book. And then I gotta make maybe a couple edits. I noticed a couple things. I think E should be high tone. So, anyways, fun stuff. Lichéesh. Thanks for trying our language. Keep going. Good stuff.
Lichéesh.
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 Cheese.
Okay.
Cheese.
Good.
Cheese.
Lichéesh.